I remember the cold hum of the courtroom lights. They flickered just once, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that even electricity falters in rooms built for judgment. That day I sat in the defendant's chair with my palms pressed against the slick oak of the table, trying to will my pulse into silence. Across from me sat Elliot, my ex-husband. A man I once trusted with the deepest parts of me, now sitting with his arms folded in smug conviction, his tie perfectly straight, as if he had dressed for a victory speech. To his right, like a statue carved from disdain, was Catherine Monroe, his mother. Elegant, untouchable, wearing pearls like armor. She didn't need to speak. Her lawyers did that for her. Words like unfit, unstable, and emotionally unpredictable slid from their lips like oil on marble. And then there was me. Marielle Carter, former therapist, recent divorcee, diagnosed with postpartum depression 11 months after giving birth to our daughter Evie. They made that detail the centerpiece of their argument, like I was a ticking bomb with my daughter trapped inside the blast radius. No one mentioned how I'd gotten help, or how I had followed every therapist's recommendation, taken every prescribed medication, attended every court-mandated session without fail. No one mentioned how Evie would curl into my arms and fall asleep the moment my fingers brushed through her hair. No, that didn't fit the narrative. I was a danger, a shadow in the shape of a mother. I remember gripping the edge of the seat as the judge delivered the ruling temporary custody to Mr. Monroe pending review. Visitation for Ms. Carter supervised. My ears rang, not loud, not like an explosion. No, it was the quiet that killed me. The kind of quiet that lives in funeral homes and hospital waiting rooms. I stared straight ahead, refusing to let my head fall, refusing to break, because I knew if I cried they'd say it proved their point. Elliot placed a reassuring hand on his mother's shoulder. That was the final image burned into my mind as I walked out of that courtroom. The man who once whispered that I was his universe, now holding on to the woman who wanted to erase me from mine. They took Evie from me that day, but they didn't take my memory. They didn't take my will. The first night without her was the longest of my life. I slept in her bed, clutched the stuffed bunny she used to drag everywhere, its ear chewed from teething. The scent of her shampoo still lingered on the pillow. I closed my eyes and saw her 4 years old in pigtails asking me why the moon follows us home at night. There was no answer I could give that would make sense of what had happened. Not to myself, not to her. They had claimed I was unfit, but I knew the truth. I wasn't dangerous. I was inconvenient. Catherine wanted full control, and I was the only barrier left after the divorce. Elliot was too weak to stand up to her, so he handed our daughter over like an apology. But I didn't scream. I didn't post on social media. I didn't call journalists. I didn't confront Elliot at his office or slash his tires in the dark. Instead, I disappeared, quietly, strategically. I moved to a 2-bedroom apartment across the city. Close enough to be near Evie's school, far enough to be invisible. I took on part-time work under a pseudonym, cash payments, no public trail. I spent my days researching case law, family court precedents, custody battle reversals. I built spreadsheets of every ruling in the state over the past 5 years. I marked patterns, not just legal, but psychological. At night, I watched videos of Evie I had saved from before the split. Her laugh, her lisp when she said spaghetti. The way she used to cover her ears when I vacuumed because she said it made the air angry. I wasn't just preparing a legal case, I was preparing myself. Preparing to face a system that didn't just doubt mothers, it devoured them. I knew I couldn't win by force. So I chose silence, the kind of silence that listens, learns, waits. 3 months after the ruling, I saw her for the first time again at a distance. It was after school. She was walking next to Catherine, who gripped her hand so tightly I saw the knuckles whiten from across the street. Evie looked smaller, not physically, just dimmed, like someone had turned down the brightness in her eyes. She didn't skip, didn't twirl her backpack strap the way she used to. Her shoulders were hunched, her mouth flat. It broke something in me. But not in the way they feared, not in a reckless way. It turned me into steel. From that day on, I watched, not like a stalker, like a guardian, like the mother they tried to erase. I kept a log of everything I saw, dates, times, behavior patterns, every scold, every yank of her wrist, every time Catherine shoved a phone into her purse mid-argument. I knew the law, knew I couldn't take pictures through their windows, but I could watch in public, and I could wait. Elliot was barely present. I counted. In 6 weeks, I only saw him pick Evie up once. The rest of the time, Catherine. Always Catherine and Evie. She never smiled. I didn't see myself as a mother anymore. That word had been stripped from me by court documents and inked rulings. But I did see myself as something else, an architect. I was building something, Not just a case, not just a plan. I was building a return, not dramatic, not explosive, but surgical, precise, because the truth doesn't need to scream. It only needs a quiet room and someone finally willing to listen. And when that room came, I knew exactly who the first voice should be. Not mine, hers. People say time heals everything, but they never specify what kind of time. Not the kind spent staring at the empty side of a twin bed. Not the kind spent circling playground fences watching your child from behind trees, pretending you were just another pedestrian with nowhere to go. 3 years passed like smoke. Not in one great fire, but in a slow, suffocating burn. The first year, I still believed they'd come to their senses. That Elliot would see how hollow the house felt without my presence. That Catherine would realize power didn't fill the quiet after bedtime. But nothing changed. In fact, they doubled down. My name vanished from school records, from Evie's pediatrician files, even from the emergency contact list I had created the day she was born. In their world, I was nothing but a bad memory. And yet I remained. Not out of vengeance, not out of spite. I stayed because I knew something they didn't. Children remember love, even when it's buried under routine silence or rewritten stories. They remember who used to braid their hair too tight, who made animal pancakes and sang off-key lullabies. They remember warmth, even when the world tries to convince them it was a lie. So I waited. And in the waiting I studied. Not just them, myself. I replayed every courtroom transcript, dissected every line Elliot's lawyers had used. I memorized the criteria for parental instability. I highlighted every clause in family code that could be weaponized, and then I did something unexpected. I enrolled in law school, not to be a lawyer, but to understand the enemy's playbook better than they did. At night, I wrote in journals, thick leather-bound notebooks I kept stacked on a shelf, each one named for a different version of my daughter. Evie, age 4, liked glitter, and asked if the moon could fall. Evie, age 6, wanted to be a firefighter but was afraid of sirens. Evie, age 7, didn't speak much anymore. I watched from across schoolyards as she grew. Taller, quieter, grayer. No sparkle in the shoes anymore. No stickers on her backpack. Just stillness, like someone had turned her world to static. Catherine always picked her up alone. Always drove the same SUV. Always wore sunglasses even in rain. I logged it all. Then one November afternoon, everything changed. It was just after 3 p.m. I was parked at my usual spot 2 blocks down from Evie's school behind the florist's van that conveniently blocked most of the view. I wasn't trying to be stealthy anymore. I simply existed where they didn't expect me. That day, Evie didn't get in the SUV. She stood on the sidewalk for several minutes, backpack slung low, her hair in a loose ponytail I knew Catherine never took the time to fix. She stared at something, no someone. Me. I froze. She didn't wave. Didn't smile, but her feet moved. One, then another. A slow, deliberate walk like she'd rehearsed this in her head 100 times, and was finally brave enough to perform it. By the time she reached the car, my hands were shaking. I hadn't heard her voice in years. I wasn't ready. And yet I rolled down the window like it was a normal Tuesday. "Hi," she said softly. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I just nodded. "Are you my mom?" The question sliced through me with surgical precision. Not cruel, just honest. Answered with the only thing I had left. I opened the passenger door. She climbed in. And everything I had prepared for unraveled. We drove in silence for 10 minutes. I didn't want to ask where she wanted to go. I just drove until she broke it. "Why did they say you left?" I tightened my grip on the wheel. "What did they say? That you were sick? That you didn't want me? That you were gone?" I pulled into the parking lot of an abandoned library and parked. My throat burned. My pulse was drumming in my ears, but I turned to face her. "I never left you," I whispered. "I was taken from you." She blinked. "By Dad, no. By people who thought they knew better. By people who needed control more than they needed the truth." I reached behind the seat and pulled out a box. It was small, worn at the edges, but inside were the journals. I handed her one. "Read the first page," I said. She opened it. Her lips moved silently. Then she turned to the second page, the third. When she finally looked up, her eyes glistened. "You watched me every day. You wrote about me every word." She didn't cry, not then. She just said, "Why didn't you fight?" And I answered, because they would have used my fight as proof. Was dangerous. They wanted me loud so they could silence me. So I stayed quiet and waited for the day you'd come find me. She stared at the box, then whispered something that changed everything. "Can I talk at the next hearing?" That night, I didn't sleep. Evie sat at my kitchen table reading 3 years of her own life through my eyes. I made hot cocoa the way she used to, like with too many marshmallows, and we sat in silence, broken only by the rustle of journal pages. I didn't ask why she wanted to testify. I knew. This wasn't just about custody anymore. This was about truth, about voice. About a little girl who had been told for years that love was control and obedience meant silence, and who now realized that wasn't love at all. Evie wasn't asking for permission. She was declaring war in her own quiet way, and I would be her sword. The next morning, we walked into my lawyer's office together. Evie clutched one of the journals to her chest like a shield. "I want to talk in court," she said. The lawyer blinked. "Has she been coached?" "No," I replied. "She's been silenced long enough. There's a certain silence that lives in courtrooms. Not the peaceful kind. No, this silence is sharp, heavy, like the seconds before a bomb goes off when everyone's breath catches, unsure if what they're hearing is real. That's the silence I was waiting for, and I didn't have to make it happen. My daughter did. Evie's decision to testify was her own. I didn't plant the idea. I didn't encourage it. I didn't even allow myself to dream of it. Because I knew the system. I knew what they'd say. She's been manipulated. This is parental alienation. She's not old enough to know what she wants. But Evie was no pawn. Not anymore. And nothing terrifies powerful people more than a girl who finally understands her own voice. My lawyer, Rachel Lynn, sat across from Evie at the long conference table, flipping through one of the journals. She paused at a page where I had drawn a small sunflower next to a note about Evie's 6th birthday. She had a meltdown when the cake was vanilla instead of chocolate, Rachel read aloud. Catherine told her crying was a sign of weak girls. Evie didn't speak for 2 hours. Evie sat motionless, arms crossed. "I remember that." Rachel glanced at me. "You documented everything," I nodded. "Every day for 3 years, not to build a case at first, just to remember her. Then it became something else, a record, a mirror." Rachel closed the journal. "If we're going to do this, we go all in. Testimony, evidence." And that flash drive, Evie pulled it from her pocket. She had found it in the box I kept taped beneath my kitchen drawer. I never told her what was on it, but she knew. The week before the hearing, I was restless. Not the kind of restless that paces or panics, the kind that plans. Every hour of every day became a blueprint. I spent mornings with Rachel preparing the foundation of our argument, the emotional and psychological impact of long-term guardianship by Catherine, the absence of Elliot in daily parenting, the journals, and finally, the videos. Afternoons, I stayed with Evie. We didn't rehearse her testimony. We just lived. We walked to the bookstore, baked cookies, watched the stars from my balcony. She asked about the day she was born, and I told her everything. How she didn't cry right away. How I thought my heart would stop waiting for that first gasp. How when she finally did cry, the sound broke me open in a way I hadn't known was possible. She asked, "Did Dad cry?" I hesitated. "No," I said. But I did, for the both of us. The morning of the hearing, I wore the same navy suit I wore the day they took her. Not out of nostalgia, out of reclamation. Evie wore a white dress with tiny embroidered stars, one I'd kept boxed since she turned 8. It fit again. At the courthouse steps, reporters waited. Rumors had started to swirl days earlier, an unexpected reversal, a high-profile custody twist, whispers of secret footage. Elliot and Catherine arrived with 2 lawyers and 0 emotion. Elliot refused to look at me. Catherine smiled, that same cold, curated smile that never quite reached her eyes. The bailiff opened the doors. Evie reached for my hand. "Are you ready?" I whispered. She nodded. "Let's end it." The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Judge Kessler, a woman with steel-gray hair and a reputation for cutting through theatrics, presided. Rachel began with the motion to reopen custody consideration based on new evidence and the minor child's formal request to testify. The opposing counsel objected immediately. "She's 13, the man scoffed. "She's been away from her mother for years. Any sudden reappearance has emotional manipulation written all over it." Kessler raised a hand. "We'll hear the child, briefly, with caution." Evie stood. My heart stopped. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She looked directly at the judge. "My name is Evie Monroe," she began. "But that's not who I really am. I used to be Evie Carter. That was my name before they changed everything." Kessler tilted her head. "You understand that what you say here must be truthful and may impact the court's ruling." "Yes, ma'am. Proceed." Evie took a shaky breath. "For the past few years, I've been told my mother didn't want me, that she was sick, that I was better off." She paused. Let the words settle. "But I found her. I found her journals. She never stopped watching over me, never stopped writing to me. She knew what day I cried, what day I laughed, what day I started losing pieces of myself." She held up one of the journals. "This says more truth than anything I've been told since I was 4. The opposing counsel stood again. "Objection irrelevant, emotional appeal. Kessler overruled. Sit down." Evie's hands trembled slightly. "But that's not all. There's more. I brought something." She looked toward Rachel. Rachel plugged the flash drive into the courtroom's display monitor. A silent video appeared on the screen. Catherine, standing in the kitchen, Evie, 7 years old, crying off screen, Catherine's voice sharp and cruel. If you cry again, I'll cancel your party. You'll eat dinner alone like the little brat you are. Your mother's not coming. She doesn't want you. Stop pretending someone loves you. I closed my eyes. Even though I had seen this video 100 times, it never hurt less. The courtroom was dead still, not even a breath. Rachel pressed pause. Your Honor, she said, voice steady. This is one of 6 recordings collected from a hidden nanny cam installed without Catherine Monroe's knowledge prior to the termination of Marielle Carter's visitation rights. The child has authenticated the voices. We are prepared to submit all 6 for evidentiary review. Elliot's lawyer stood panicked. Your Honor, we request an immediate recess. Denied, Kessler snapped. Miss Monroe, you may sit. Evie turned and for the first time looked at me. Not a word, just a nod. A silent, searing promise passed between us. We're not done. Outside, the reporters waited. Inside, the storm had only just begun. There's a peculiar kind of silence that falls when the truth finally enters the room. It doesn't bang the door open or set fire to the carpet. It just exists. And suddenly no one can breathe. That's what happened after the video played. Catherine's voice had echoed off the courtroom walls like a ghost with claws. Her words weren't just cruel, they were strategic. They weren't the slip of a frustrated woman. They were the blueprint of a manipulator who had spent years crafting control through psychological war. And now it was all unraveling. Judge Kessler looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Her knuckles were white on the bench. Miss Lynn, she said to my lawyer, her voice like glass about to shatter. Are there more of these recordings? Yes, Your Honor. All time-stamped, cataloged, and authenticated. Taken during a court-permitted period of supervised observation prior to the guardianship transfer. Submit them immediately. Rachel handed over a sleek black folder thick with timestamps, expert witness statements, and transcriptions. Elliot sat still, eyes blank. But Catherine blinked like someone waking up mid-dream, only this dream had teeth and a courtroom audience. The next 2 days were a brutal parade of everything they thought would stay buried. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. My voice had already echoed through the pages of journals, the corners of video frames, the memories I preserved while they tried to erase me. Evie's testimony was enough. The footage was enough. But what truly cracked the courtroom open was what came next. It was a small, almost forgettable moment. The court had adjourned for a recess. I stepped into the hallway to breathe. Evie sat beside me on a bench, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm cocoa. Her legs swung beneath her dress like she was 7 again. But her eyes, those were older, hardened, quiet fire beneath. And then she whispered, I heard her talking to Dad once. I turned. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I was under the table. What did she say? She said, don't worry, Elliot. If that woman ever tries to come back, we'll bury her in paperwork. We'll make her look crazy. You just nod in court and I'll handle the rest. I froze. Evie looked up at me. Does that help? It did more than help. It detonated. Rachel filed for an emergency motion that same afternoon to call Catherine Monroe as a witness. Elliot's team objected. But Judge Kessler, after reviewing the video and statements, allowed it. Watching Catherine walk to the stand was like watching a marble statue trying to emote. Her poise cracked only once when she saw Evie sitting beside me, not beside Elliot. You've had primary influence over the child for the last 4 years, correct? Rachel asked. Catherine nodded once. With Elliot's approval. And during that time, did you ever state in Mr. Monroe's presence that you would manipulate this court to ensure Ms. Carter was seen as unstable? Catherine scoffed. Of course not. Rachel raised an eyebrow. So you deny making this statement? We'll bury her in paperwork. Make her look crazy. You just nod in court and I'll handle the rest. Silence. No denial. No objection. Just Catherine blinking. Calculating. Judge Kessler leaned forward. Mrs. Monroe. Do you wish to amend your answer? No, she said flatly. I don't recall saying that. Evie stood. No warning. No permission. She just stood. Excuse me, Your Honor. Kessler turned startled. Miss Monroe, I remember her saying it. I was under the dining room table. I'd spilled apple juice and was hiding. She thought I wasn't there, Evie Catherine hissed. Kessler raised her hand. Mrs. Monroe, one more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt. Evie didn't sit back down. She looked directly at the judge. My mother isn't crazy. She's the only one who ever listened, and I don't want to live in a house with people who lie like that. The room didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. Kessler stared at her. Then slowly she turned back to Catherine. This court will recess until morning. And Mrs. Monroe, if you so much as speak to the child outside counsel's presence, I will issue an immediate protective order." Catherine stood stiffly and walked out. She didn't look back. That night, Rachel knocked on my motel door. She had a file in her hand. "What is it?" I asked. She handed it to me. We dug deeper, looked into Catherine's foundation accounts. There are transfers, big ones, from Evie's trust, unauthorized, masked under education expenses. I stared at the numbers. $75,000. Gone. Evie hadn't seen a dollar of it. She still wore thrifted coats and carried an old iPad that barely turned on. "She stole from her," I whispered. Rachel nodded. "And the law is clear. Any misuse of minor trust funds during contested guardianship is grounds for immediate revocation of rights." The final day of court, Catherine didn't speak. She sat like a broken chess piece queen tipped over by her own ambition. Rachel presented the findings. Kessler barely blinked. Her voice was steel when she spoke. "This court finds Catherine Monroe in violation of guardianship ethics. Her access to the minor is suspended pending criminal investigation." Elliot looked like he wanted to dissolve into the chair, but he didn't move. Kessler continued. "Given the evidence provided, recordings, written journals, and the child's sworn testimony, this court finds that previous assessments of Ms. Carter's fitness were based on manipulated records and false narratives. Custody will be restored to the biological mother effective immediately." I didn't cry, not then. I just reached for Evie's hand. She didn't cry either. She just whispered, "We did it." After the courtroom emptied, we stood alone in the hallway. I knelt down to Evie's height. "You okay?" She nodded. "Can we go get pancakes?" I laughed, choked a little. "Anywhere you want. Can we stop calling me Monroe?" I paused. "What do you want to be called?" She smiled. "Evie Carter." And that right there was the moment I got her back. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through truth, patience, and the voice of a girl who had been silenced for too long. There's no thunderclap when you win, no orchestra playing as you step into the sun. Victory reel. Victory is quieter than people think. It's a seatbelt clicking into place, a child leaning into your side without fear, a last name whispered like a vow. It's walking out of a courtroom with your daughter's hand in yours, knowing they'll never get another chance to rewrite the ending. We didn't say a word in the elevator, not because we were afraid, because we didn't need to. Evie leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. I felt her breathing slow, deep, safe. The marble floors, the echoing voices, the smell of processed paper and desperation. It all faded behind us. We stepped into the parking lot like survivors stepping out of ash. Rachel walked beside us, her briefcase swinging at her side. "I'll file the protective order first thing in the morning," she said. "Just in case they try anything." "They won't," I said calmly. "They've already lost the only thing they ever used to justify their lies." Rachel smiled. "Evie." I nodded. She was their shield. Now she's her own sword. We drove in silence for a while. Not the brittle silence of fear, the soft one, the kind you earn. "Where are we going?" Evie asked, unbuckling her seatbelt as we stopped at a red light. "Home," I said. She tilted her head. "But we don't have one. Not yet." The apartment I'd been living in was temporary, a borrowed shell, a war room. It had served its purpose. But now we needed something more, something permanent. So I took her to the place I'd been building in secret, slowly, silently, over the past 3 years. I had bought it under a private LLC, no trace of my name, no way for them to sniff it out or sabotage it. Just one simple word on the deed, EVC, Evie Carter. It was a quiet 2-story craftsman home tucked beneath a line of willows on the edge of the city where the sky still dared to turn pink at dusk. The kind of home with creaky floorboards and windows that begged for curtains. The kind of home we'd fill with warmth, not fear. Evie stepped out of the car and looked up at it. "You bought a house, I built a future." She didn't say anything, just walked to the door, turned the handle, and stepped inside like she belonged, because she did. We unpacked slowly, deliberately. Each journal found a shelf in the study. The flash drive was locked away in a safe. And the dress she wore in court, we folded it into tissue paper and sealed it in a memory box. "Not because we're hiding," I told her, "but because we've moved forward." She nodded. New story. Catherine tried to reach out 2 weeks later. A letter. No apology, no remorse, just thinly veiled demands cloaked in pity. She wrote that Evie might be traumatized by the transition and that familiar faces could ease the emotional burden. I didn't reply. I sent the letter to Rachel, who filed a no-contact motion so fast it made the court clerk wince. As for Elliot, nothing. No emails, no texts, no effort. He had always been Catherine's echo, not his own man. Now that her voice was silenced, he had nothing left to say. Evie blossomed slowly, like something thawing. She danced barefoot in the hallway again, played piano with both hands, asked for her old bedtime song, Moon River, the one I used to hum when she had ear infections, and one night, just as I tucked her in, she whispered, "Mom, I knew you weren't gone. I think I always knew." I swallowed the lump in my throat. How? Because I never stopped feeling loved, even when they told me you didn't. That was the night I cried, not because I was sad, because it was over, because she came back whole, because they tried to steal her spirit, but she carried my love like armor the entire time. 6 months passed. I went back to work on my own terms this time, not as a therapist in someone else's office. I opened the Carter Center, a quiet building behind the house where mothers like me could come to rebuild away from noise judgment and paper trails. No press, no cameras, just healing. Evie helped paint the sign. She chose lavender for the logo. Because it's soft, but it survives anything, she said. Smart girl, just like her mother. And then one afternoon, as we watered the garden, a car pulled up outside the fence. Black, familiar. Evie stiffened beside me. Catherine stepped out, dressed in navy, her lips pressed into that same practiced smile. She didn't approach, just stood at the edge of the property behind the line Rachel's restraining order had drawn. She held something in her hand, a letter. Evie looked at me. "Do we have to know?" I said. We kept watering. Catherine stayed for 20 minutes, then got in her car and drove away. Evie never asked what the letter said. I never opened it. Some truths don't need replies. Some endings are stronger in silence. Today, people call me brave, but I'm not. I'm just a mother who learned to wait longer than they expected, to love louder in the quiet, to let my daughter find her voice without pushing mine forward. They said I was unfit to raise her, but Evie stood in a courtroom and told the world who I really was. And that truth didn't scream, it didn't storm, it simply stood tall and clear and made the world listen. We didn't just win custody, we reclaimed our story. And we wrote a new one, not with ink, with silence, love, and a girl brave enough to speak when it mattered most.